You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 263, Echoes of Mortis Part 1. My name is Albert Padilla, and tonight we are finally and officially going to dive into the Mortis Arc. And to do so, and without further ado, please welcome to the show, he's Sith, yes and no. He's Jonesy. Jonesy, good evening, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this afternoon, Albert?
I am doing just fine, ready and excited about this episode, honestly, because it's something that, you know, Mortis is something that if you are a longtime listener of the Cantina Cast, you've heard Mike name drop Mortis. I don't even know how many times. Before we came on the air, I was making a joke that there was probably a good run of, 60 episodes where somehow he found a way to tie whatever they were talking about to Mortis.
I think it may have been one of the original drinking games of the Cantina Cast.
It might have been. And it's probably fair, right? Because there's a lot here, obviously, to consume.
Right.
And you probably could tie a lot of it back to it. But anyway, so, when we were kind of tossing around some new ideas going into this year about what we wanted to talk about, this is one of the topics that it seemed like it's always been there. It's always been discussed in the show, but had never really been dedicated to there had never been an episode dedicated, never been spotlighted like this. So hopefully we'll do it some justice, and I'll get to more about how we're going to try to tackle this, the Mortis arc, and even beyond that, the legacy of Mortis here in just a little bit. But first, let's get to the news, because we do got a couple things in here. First and foremost, we've got a new poster by the man who can do no wrong, Paul Shipper. I don't know that this man has ever done anything that has been just lackluster or he mailed it in any way.
Oh, man.
Everything this guy does and touches is just amazing. But what did you think of the poster when you first saw it?
Yeah, this is the Star Wars Celebration poster, and it's beautiful. It's really nice. The colors pop. It's this red and blue dynamic, of course. Lots of great characters. There's some characters missing, though, that some people have mentioned, which is a little strange. Characters like C-3PO and BB-8. And is Poe on there? There was another one.
Poe's not on there. I think Rose is missing as well.
Yeah, Rose is gone too. So, it's hard to fit everybody into the poster, but what he did on there and then how he accentuated it all, man, it looks great. And I'm really excited. I know we had some comments on social media of people who are going that are excited to pick this one up. So I might be in that boat with them.
Yeah, I thought it was great. Like I said, I've always been a big fan of him. And if you've never had a chance to go visit paulshipper.com and just see, you'll be very surprised, I think, about how much work he's done that you've seen before and just never really recognized that was actually him. So,
but when you see it, though, it's instant that you recognize his work, though, and it just fits. And he's got this style that is so recognizable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like the way you mentioned the blue and the red. That it reminds me, right before The Last Jedi came out, we were getting all of those different.
Right.
I don't remember what they were, like little social media pictures of Poe and Phasma and Rey, Luke, all of them, and they were kind of in that same blue and red perspectives, light and dark. I guess you can make that argument. So, anyways, there's definitely probably some symbolism there, and you can go online and look at all the people that have posted stuff about what all this means. But it's a great poster. So, yeah. Also, with regards to Celebration, we got our first list, and I'm not going to call these guys B list because there's some pretty good names on here, people that I'm a huge fan of. But we did get our first batch. There's a lot more coming, is my assumption. But we did get our first batch of guests that would be there at Star Wars Celebration, including Chewbacca himself, Jonas. We got Sam Witwer, who is fitting for this episode because we're going to be talking about him, but he's known for doing the voice of the son in the Mortis Arc, as well as Darth Maul. And then we mentioned Galen Skywalker, who's from Force Unleashed.
Unleashed.
Yeah, so he's done, and he's also a huge D&D nerd for anybody that's wondering. And he's put out a book recently called Arts and Arcana, which is like a history of Dungeons and Dragons, a collection of books and pictures and everything else. Yeah, his brother was in there. Kyle Newman was also one of the writers.
Right.
It's an amazing, amazing book. Cannot recommend that enough if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons work. Then we got Snap Wexley, Greg Grunberg. Shocker, I told you. I mean, we knew he was going to be here. He's probably going to be in 9. Sorry, spoiler alert, because him and JJ are just, thick as thieves. They've been in just about everything together. Orly Shoshan, who is Shakti, which is interesting because I had never really even seen a picture right before this.
Oh, really?
Anyway,
she really did the tours back in the prequels era.
Yeah.
When I was going to fan days up in the Dallas area, she was always there with the Clone Wars cartoon voice actors as well. And so I've met her a couple of times, and she's pretty nice.
You reading anything into the fact that they've got somebody from the Clone Wars coming out to be on Celebration?
Not with Orly Shoshan, to be honest with you. I think this is kind of filling out the ranks a bit. We've had comic artists and stuff. This is our really first batch of actors for the most part. But so of these, are any of them like get you excited to meet them? Like I'm kind of excited to meet Jonas or have maybe the opportunity to meet Jonas and Sam Witwer in particular, because those two have not. I mean, Jonas is new, but Sam Witwer hadn't been to any of the conventions that I had been to. I've met a bunch of the other actors before, so these are really kind of on top of my list of, is there an opportunity to get up there and shake their hand?
Yeah, I think all of them are exciting in their own different ways, but I would say, Sam Witwer is probably the one I'm more excited about. And again, it's not even D&D. I'm more excited to talk about, Star Wars. I'm more excited to talk about Dungeons and Dragons with him than Star Wars itself.
Yeah, he's just so cool. As well. Yeah, well, I mean, he was in Smallville too, right?
Yeah,
and so I've been a fan of his for a long time, and his voice acting is phenomenal.
Yep.
And he's got that chiseled chin. Who doesn't like that chiseled chin?
Exactly. The handsome man.
That's right.
And then just to kind of selfishly plug, we've definitely interested to know if you guys are going to be heading out to Celebration. Of course, we've mentioned on the show, we'll be out there. We'll be on the podcast stage. Still don't know when we'll be on, what day and what time slot just yet. But if you are interested in kind of checking in with us, and we're trying to plan something where we'll get a chance to meet up with anybody that's a listener or follower of the show, or anybody that we pick up there that wants to kind of just mingle or whatever, you can visit eargluemedia.com/SWCC. We've got a link there where you can sign up. What else do we have on there? What are we asking? Like blood type, donations, that kind of stuff? Yeah,
usually it's just a way to contact you, email address, what days you're going to be there. It's just to give us an idea of what you are. We're starting to plan where we think we're going to be. And again, we don't have all the details yet, so nothing's set in stone. But we're trying to get an idea of who wants to be contacted by us if they're interested in knowing where we'll be to hang out, especially for after hours events. We'd love to be able to meet some folks that listen to the show. And so it's just a way for us to be able to reach out, especially as we get closer and start to confirm, hey, we're going to be at location A on Thursday night or location B on Friday night and that type of thing. So again, just a way. We're not spamming you. It's not part of a newsletter or anything like that. It's just to say, we're going, hey, I'm going to SWCC, and please contact me. Let me know what you guys are going to do. So that's the idea. And we'll let you, I mean, we plan to put the little list of events out on the website at that same address. So it's just, we just don't have anything to put because they haven't given us all the information yet.
Cool. And then also just quickly, Solo Star Wars Story has picked up an Academy Award nomination for Best Visual Effects. And I don't remember who the other nominees were, with the exception of one, which is a conflict of interest for me because it was Ready Player One. So I'm actually pulling for Ready Player One. Sorry, Star Wars.
That's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to beat Ready Player One on that one. And I didn't look at the other nominees either because I stopped at those two. So
keep talking.
Cool.
I'm trying to pull it up.
Yeah, it's cool that Solo got a nomination though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and well deserving. There's some moments in there, especially when you think about when the that whatever that monster was right before the black hole stuff. That was all really just nail biting. So Ready Player One, First Man, Christopher Robin, which is interesting. I guess we can pull for Ewan McGregor there. Was he in that one, or was I'm thinking of the other movie?
Yeah, that's Ewan McGregor. Okay. Yep.
And then of course Avengers: Infinity War.
Oh snap!
Never heard of that movie.
Oh well, yeah, no pun intended. Yeah. So Avengers. Wow, that's a pretty tough sled. But just look at the field on that one. I mean, you talk about pop culture, nerd culture, geek culture, whatever you want to talk about, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. That's a lot packed into one bracket there. So that's
absolutely,
that's really cool. I mean, that's a nice field. I like that. Who do you think's going to win?
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One. I'm going to go with Ready Player One as well. Although I bet you Avengers wins.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to pull for let's pull for the underdog here.
Sure.
Underdog's
if you want to pull for the underdog,
Robin.
yeah, well, that or First Man. I have not seen First Man, but Christopher Robin's probably the underdog. Although I did see that movie, Christopher Robin. Good. It was pretty decent. I thought the special effects were actually really good. Like, you forget those are not real bears that are running around.
Yeah. Who doesn't like Winnie the Pooh? Anyway.
All right. And I guess the other bit of news we have is there is a Galaxy's Edge comic miniseries that has been announced to coincide with the release of, or I guess not the release, but the grand opening of the new theme park.
Right. Yeah. This is a 5-issue miniseries. It follows Doc Ondar. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. So he's the
Ithorian?
Yes, he's an Ithorian. He's a collector of rare antiquities. So to borrow a quote from a related franchise. And I don't really know how I feel about this. This is kind of a throwaway series to me. I hope something.
This has me written all over it.
It does. I mean, this is going to have all these random little tidbits of knowledge that you're going to store, and the rest of us will probably quickly forget. But I think this is some of the things that people get a little irritated about is that do we have to tie every little thing into every other little thing? Yeah. So they're pushing the theme parks. That's great and all, but yeah, we'll see about this one. But it's only 5 issues. It's not like they're trying to drag it out for an entire comic series, but I don't anticipate those going to sell real well.
Yeah, they usually don't. And I'm guilty for picking up comics that are tied to TV releases and movie releases, and they go absolutely nowhere. The most recent, I think, honestly, was probably Fringe. When that TV series came out, they had done a series of comic books that was kind of a precursor to the very first episode, like the pilot episode. But I love that kind of stuff. I love the additional material that means absolutely nothing, has no significance, and you get to, chuckle because you know it and no one else does. That's, I don't know, weird, but whatever.
I feel like we should plug the basement right here.
Yeah, so welcome to the basement now.
Yeah. Check out chapter 6, part 6.
All right. Well, that's all we got for the news. And we'll pick up on some of the stuff I'm more excited about. I can't wait to hear. We're getting closer to Star Wars Celebration. We're getting more and more stuff. I think that's where the excitement's obviously for me right now. And I think we'll certainly be getting more lists of actors and people. So
yeah, the pace is going to pick up and we're going to start to get to some really good, juicy Star Wars stuff going on. Rumors of trailers and all this other thing. So yeah, wouldn't surprise me if we're still a little bit further out on the trailer, but yeah, a lot of exciting
Super Bowl's
stuff.
Coming. Although that never really happened. I said Super Bowl's coming, but that doesn't really happen.
Oh, you can't say those words, man. We'll get sued.
Oh, sorry.
Big game.
Well,
Big game's
talk
coming.
to the producer of the show, not me.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, let's get on to Mortis. So before we start, just kind of let me talk about what we were trying to do, because we really kind of tossed around a couple different ideas in terms of how we wanted to tackle the Mortis trilogy and then the legacy. And by legacy, I mean the stuff that came afterwards, meaning Rebels and anything else that we can maybe tie back to some of the things and themes that we learned from Mortis. But really what we want to do is break this up into 2 shows. I think what you're going to find with this first show is we're really going to be focused. It's going to be more of a traditional Cantina Cast character dissection. We'll talk about some of the characters individually, even Mortis as a character, the planet or planetoid, whatever Mortis is. And then we'll get into some of the scene and quote analysis as well. I think when we come back to part 2, we'll focus a little bit more on some general themes like the prophecy of the chosen one. What does balance mean with regards to the Mortis arc? And then maybe we'll dive into some of the different theories. And not any one theory is right or wrong, folks. But the theories that revolve around the balance of the Force, that kind of thing. So that's kind of how we've broken it out. And hopefully that pays off. So we'll find out here soon enough. Right. So let's start with just kind of a recap. I know we definitely have some new listeners, folks that maybe have no history, no context of what I was mentioning earlier with Mike talking about Mortis so much. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Mortis, Mortis really is a series of 3 episodes of the Clone Wars that premiered in January, February of 2011. So nearly, 9 years ago, which is crazy. It's how time flies.
It's incredible it's been that long.
Yeah. So season 3, episodes 15, 16, and 17. The episodes are called Overlords. Part 2 is Altar of Mortis. And part 3 is Ghosts of Mortis. So what I want to do is just kind of start with let's talk about our initial thoughts after our first viewing, whenever that was. I think for me, they had to have been official, or I guess the original releases when I saw them. But anyways, for Jonesy, I guess when you first saw these episodes, what were you thinking? Because, and I don't want to set you up or anything like that, but these are very different. They're very different than what we had gotten up until then. And even looking back at the catalog of episodes, they stand out still. They're very unique in terms of their approach and what they were trying to do and the setup and plot and everything else. But anyways, your thoughts?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I was in a bit of a lull in Star Wars fandom. So I was watching Clone Wars, but I wasn't dissecting every moment of it. I wasn't looking for every meaning of it. And when these came on, by about the time season 3 rolled around, I was very in and out of it. I'd catch up at times, or I'd have it on while I had a day off and doing things around the house or whatnot. And this is the time we were moving around this time too. So it was this, I didn't really watch them very closely, and I definitely didn't get a lot of meaning out of them. And it came several years later when I went to rewatch these that this jumped out at me. And then it was really total confusion as to what the heck I just watched and what the actual implications were in a more further reaching standpoint, especially trying to reconcile what we already had seen in the movies and how that tied together and how that fit. But so it was very different. I had to catch up a little bit. And then it wasn't until I started listening to Cantina Cast that I had to really go and listen or rewatch it like 10 times. And then I think I watched another 4 times going into this episode to really try to, again, tie everything together and what all the character motivations were and why this arc is important and how it fits into the general Chosen One themes and balance and these ideas that we have, and why, and then had to take it a step further. Like, why is this so difficult to understand? And Dave Filoni's very generic messages of metaphors and things like that. But what about you? Did you get into this right away, or did you have to, I don't know, do this over time?
Yeah, I think so. I was intrigued by this. So it was very different, like I said, leading up until these episodes came out. It was a big departure, I guess, from the tried and true formula of what are General Grievous and Dooku up to this week kind of episode, right? And that's kind of where Clone Wars was for me. And then with these episodes, I was intrigued by, I guess, the world building that was happening, because it was such a departure. They were laying down so much. In fact, we were kind of talking about this before we came on the air. Even in rewatching this in preparation for this, and there's been other shows that I've done now on Cantina Cast where I've pulled in some Mortis stuff, Rebels being the most recent one. But, anytime you sit down and you really try to digest this, it seems like it is just a line after line of these episodes. There's just full of content and things that you could spin, and I get hyper focused on every single word that's said, and the affliction and the looks, and I mean, there's just so much to digest. There's so much that comes at you so fast, and I can't honestly say, like you on first viewing, that I really took it all in. In fact, I don't think anybody really could, because if you think about it, when this was written, there's so much more that's come out within just the last 5 years, right? That has been able to build upon that. So they've kind of planted those seeds and allowed creators and artists to kind of express different stories or run with different threads and expand upon them later down the road. But I don't think even they realize exactly how much they were kind of laying down here. And we probably should say, and if you haven't heard already, George Lucas was very integral in coming up with ensuring that these stories played out the way they did. So this is not, purely Dave Filoni. This was Dave Filoni as the director for it all, but this was heavily influenced by George Lucas themes and stories and that kind of thing that were coming from George Lucas as well. So I think there's one interview where Filoni was talking about how they had to get this right because they're dealing with the Force. They're dealing with these things that had never really been touched upon with outside of the movies. And even in the movies, they were really abstract thoughts. They weren't very concrete. There weren't a lot of definitives there. And we start getting some of that here in the Mortis trilogy and the Mortis arc. So.
And the only way they were going to get it right was with George and that input and his constant oversight on it. And he felt very strongly about that. And I think that was a good thing. I mean, this is right in George's wheelhouse. This is what he was trying to get across for a long time. I think one of the things that had turned me off a little bit about this was, the Clone Wars I thought was supposed to be more not Jedi oriented, not Jedi focused. And yet it started to skew back into that thing. And so I think that's where I probably got a little turned off on it too, was I was really enjoying the clone aspect of it. And some of the clone episodes were so good that we started pulling back to the Jedi, and, we kind of had a lot of Jedi in the early to mid 2000s. Yeah.
And part of me thinks that was intentional, and it kind of echoes, the whole theme of the Jedi saying, hey, we're not warriors, we're peacekeepers. And, because of everything that happened in the Clone Wars, they ended up becoming warriors. And I think that's kind of where you saw it kind of shifting that way, just to kind of echo, those lines and kind of feel the pull that the Jedi were feeling in being sucked into the war. The only other thing I would say upon first watch is it did feel very experimental at the time. Even now, we really don't know much about what happens after the Clone Wars series is over, right? Even after this episode, what happens when they went back? Did they talk to Yoda? Did they not? Did they bring it to the council? We never heard about it again in the Clone Wars series. So, but I think what stands out are they did drop some of these the concepts that they were kind of teasing out, the purpose of the message, which is a lot of what we'll get into in part 2, unfortunately. But that wasn't lost upon me. I get what they were trying to do here in kind of showing some parallels between, Anakin, balance of the Force, and a parallel between the balance of the Force on Mortis versus the balance of the Force of the galaxy, that kind of stuff. That's all kind of in your face. They kind of make that pretty clear. But yeah, it was, again, very interesting, very different from today. But I guess let's focus. Let's talk about today, and I guess we'll talk more about the legacy of Mortis next episode. But overall, I think there's really an importance here that lies in that, again, in that mythos of Star Wars, especially like the Chosen One prophecy and the balance and what that means in Star Wars as foretold, by the prophecy. I think it laid down some very like transparent or maybe not so transparent revelations and confirmations of like Anakin's personal beliefs, the pain and guilt he was suffering from, after the death of his mother. There were things that we knew to be true from the movies, but we just hadn't really got a lot of those affirmations in the movies. And we do, again, in this episode, there are some very poignant moments, very specific moments where they're kind of touching upon the emotions and what some of the characters are feeling. And then on top of all that, I think the Force got so much bigger, I guess, if I could quote Luke for the first time when we got these. And then we kind of saw we wouldn't see anything like this again until, and there's shades of it here and there, but really we didn't get a big mass amount of the Force being as big as it was, or really understanding the breadth and depth of the Force until the Lost Missions episodes. And then, with Rebels and then Force Awakens and Last Jedi, we got a lot more of that. So anything I missed, I guess, in terms of,
well, I think one of the things that really was definitive about this was that it came out and clearly stated Anakin is the chosen one. Mm-hmm. Like it erased all doubt that he was the chosen one. And that was the purpose, is to make sure this is very clear that Anakin is the chosen one. And there's a lot of ambiguity around some of that too. And we'll talk through some of that as we go, but it was meant to be very, very clear about what his status was with that, with the prophecy.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Even with the Phantom Menace, when that came out, that really wasn't definitive for some folks. After Jedi, there was plenty of debate about, was Anakin the chosen one, or we didn't have the prophecy then, but who was really the savior of the galaxy? Was it Anakin or versus Luke? Right. That was our informal way of talking about who was the chosen one. And then when the Phantom Menace came out, it really kind of just led to even more kind of confusion for some folks, and people hardening fast on their theories of who was right, who was wrong, that kind of thing. But yeah, this was a clear shot of, hey, this is who the chosen one is, and here's maybe a little bit reason why.
Right.
All right, so let's just do a quick summary of this arc. Do you want to take a stab at kind of summarizing all 3 episodes?
Yeah.
I can do it if you want.
In 30 seconds or less, right?
30 seconds or less to go.
So generally speaking, we had Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin are meeting up with Rex and company, and they somehow get in this weird interdimensional kind of offset, and they're being drawn into a planet that we end up knowing as Mortis, to the father, the daughter, and the son. Basically, they're curious. The father in particular is curious. News has reached his ears that the chosen one has been found, and he needs to test to make sure that this is actually true. the intent is he's dying and he needs someone to replace him in order to keep his children, his daughter, who is the epitome of the light side, and his son, that's the epitome of the dark side, in balance. And this is important because Mortis is I forgot what Qui-Gon ended up calling it, but it's this conduit for the Force that the entire cosmic force goes through. So it's I guess you could probably argue this is one of the most powerful Force locuses, if you will, in the universe. So if this gets out of balance, there are dire consequences for not only the galaxy, but the entire universe. And we get into a series of trials and tribulations for Anakin in particular, in order to test him. And then we start to see things falling apart as each one of these characters starts to make decisions. And so without kind of going through the whole ending, that's really the premise of the episode.
Yeah.
is trying to maintain balance, but the decisions that we make and this idea of the future and what we can do with it starts to really skew our characters as we go through that arc.
Yeah, good job. So we'll kind of jump from there and go right into kind of talking about some of the different characters. And we're going to start with Mortis itself, because I think the question, there's a lot of questions here around Mortis and what is it? I've always heard it referred to as a planet. It doesn't look like the size of the planet as they're approaching it. But if you have not seen the episode, essentially what it looks like, it almost looks like two Sith holocrons kind of stacked on top of each other.
Right.
It's basically I don't know, what is that? An octahedron? Yeah. 8-sided dice, whatever.
It's very sci-fi.
Yeah, very sci-fi.
Yeah.
And even then, just some of the symbolism of, it's completely dark, and as the middle opens up, there's light inside, right? So anyways, right. But from what we know about it, again, you mentioned the father, the son, and the daughter all live here. Those are also, they've got a lot of other names, like the Ones, the Celestials, I think. Right. What's the other one? Force Wielders is another one.
Right.
Yeah, they've referred to them as well. But basically, I think we know, and kind of what Jonesy was saying, when we first start in the episode, they're kind of on the outskirts of the Outer Rim. But by all official accounts and sources, Mortis is actually in wild space. So somewhere they're not only teleported into another, they're kind of teleported into this another area into wild space somewhere. So we really don't know exactly where this exists in the overall galaxy of Star Wars. But like you said, Qui-Gon mentioned it being a conduit of the Force. He says it's like a magnet, as well as I forget now the other word he used, as well for the Force. But essentially everything, the whole Force flows through Mortis, which is interesting in itself. It's an interesting aspect of the planet, is that, you would think something like a planet that is the Force, that all the Force flows through, would be teeming with life, and yet it's not. I think Ahsoka makes a comment in this episode, in the very first one in Overlords,
no animals.
That there are no animals.
Right.
Yeah, there's plant life, but there's no animals, that's kind of a interesting thing, especially when you think about like Dagobah, right? That's teeming with life. We know that.
Right.
Another interesting aspect of Mortis, of the planet, is really it cycles every single day. When day comes, there's like new life that spreads, and as night comes, everything dies and decays out completely. I forget now if it's Obi-Wan or so. I think it's Obi-Wan, or I forget it. One of them makes another comment too, that throughout the day, as the day progresses, the seasons change as well.
Right, Obi-Wan, yeah.
Yeah. So, the whole, just to take it back to, seasons changing, the cycle of life being, in the morning, death coming at night. It was just immediately reminded me of like The Last Jedi, and when Luke is trying to teach Leia that first lesson, and he asks her what she sees, and she says the island life, death and decay, that feeds new life. And
right.
Then he finally asks, in between it all, she says balance.
Right.
And we know Rian Johnson did some homework, and you can go out there and see some of the articles that were written and some of the quotes that he had. But he did mention that Mortis was something that was important to him, and as part of his writing and preparation for The Last Jedi, he did go ahead and watch some of these things. I would like to think that this is probably one of those aspects of it, at least with regards to balance.
Yeah, this aspect of it.
Some of that.
Yeah, this is very almost verbatim what the father was explaining and what we saw in Last Jedi for that one moment. of this concept of just constant renewing. And Qui-Gon said it himself, and we've touched on this before, the cosmic force of this constant feeding of life. Things die and it becomes renewed and it becomes life. And so it's very consistent in that regard across multiple stories that we're very familiar with across Clone Wars and into the newer content.
Just as a quick thing too, the Mortis is interesting because it's got these floating rocks, I guess.
Remind me of Pandora of Avatar.
It does remind you, of Avatar. Yeah, no. But no, what do we call it? In the Lost missions, if I'm not mistaken, I thought the planet, the area, wherever Yoda goes to, is something similar. I want to say that there are floating planets, and I should have done my homework to go look at that. But anyways, I had seen that before in Star Wars and Clone Wars, something. And that's probably where it was. I may be wrong, but that aspect of it, that it's very similar to that planet, and there's similarities to Ahch-To, similarities to Dagobah. I wish we could, conclusively find out whether or not there is something that links all of these different worlds together, because they are very similar as conduits or powerful teaming in the Force, if you will.
Right.
All right. We got anything else? I guess from your perspective that we didn't touch on with regards to the planet?
I think the one question I have about the planet is, was the planet there or was the planet created for them? And we never I don't think we ever got confirmation of that. We have the father talking about them becoming anchorites, so they're in exile, and it's effectively a prison as well.
Yeah, he said it's a sanctuary, but it's also a prison.
Right, but we never really explained if this was something that he created, or if it was something that was already in place that they were able to, go back to or seek refuge in.
Yeah. And I think my own interpretation is that it was something he created, right? Because
that was kind of where I was going to.
Yeah, I mean, because he makes comments later on, and not to dive into the father now, but I think it's totally appropriate. He makes comments about how he felt it was his responsibility to keep his daughter and his son in check, and the only way he could do that was to remove them from the world as we know it, or as the other characters know it. Go to some place, set up shop, and ensure that they could never leave, right? And that was his way of kind of protecting his children, from them and from everybody else. From that, I just implied that he somehow had a hand in the construction of this world or existence or plane of existence or whatever it is that Mortis is.
Yeah, and I guess that would make sense why there would be no life if it was created specifically for that purpose of containment.
Yeah.
So okay.
It's got to be a very and I don't think I have this in the other notes. So I'll just say it now. As I was driving home today, I'm thinking this has got to be the most boring place to be if you're the son, the daughter, or even the father. There is nothing there. You got those three people. You've got all this world. There's no life. What do you do all day?
Yeah, I mean, you can see why the son wants out.
Yeah, yes, exactly right.
He's got some
forget the dark side. He's just bored.
Yeah,
right? You have to get the hell out of Dodge. Go live his life, man. He's a teenager on the run. All right. Well, let's get into, I guess, the Celestials, and really just kind of talk about who they are, what they are, and what we know about them, because it is an interesting concept again that, for one, and I threw this in the notes because it's just something that I've always been fascinated with, and maybe it comes back to my years as a Catholic years ago, but the idea of a Holy Trinity is a really neat concept, and we see it in all kinds of forms of media, but this is our first one in Star Wars where we've got three. Now you can make the argument there was three before, maybe Luke, Leia, and Vader. I've heard Luke, Leia, Han, whoever however you want to defend your favorite trio for Star Wars, but this was a very definitive kind of trio of a Holy Trinity, if you will. And they mentioned the Father, they mentioned the Son, they mentioned the Daughter. We don't really get to know who the mother is unless we go back to Legends, which I don't really want to bring up Legends if I was trying to really just stick to the canon stuff. But in Legends, we did have a mother who was Abeloth, and I forget the whole story. She tried to dip into one well, dipped into the other well. Things went horribly wrong. She got a lot of teeth, turned ugly, and that was kind of the end of her.
We tend not to speak of Abeloth. Yeah. Things got messy.
Things got real hairy there. But anyways, there was a mother in here. So this isn't the first time that we've had this concept of the Celestials, of these godlike force gods, if you will. But from a canon perspective, this definitely was the first one. And I threw this question out there about whether or not they were true overlords. Because the definition of an overlord is a lord over other lords, a lord paramount, an absolute or supreme leader, one having great power or authority. And I guess that last definition of having great power and authority probably makes sense.
Right.
But you got to wonder, the title of the episode is Overlords. Again, what's on Mortis? Nothing. So who are they the overlords of? I mean, was this a name that was given to them prior to them going over to Mortis and setting up shop, or was this? I don't know. That was the part that escaped me, I guess. Any thoughts there?
I think the latter definition is definitely what they were aiming for. I think the other thing is the father tells us a little bit about this too, about that they had to withdraw because they were able to use the Force in ways that no one else was capable of doing.
Yeah.
Which of course,
and we do see some of that here.
Oh, absolutely. The extinguishing of the lightsabers. It seems like we don't see the daughter do it, but we definitely see the son and the father do it, including touching the blade without injury. Of course, we've seen that in Old Republic as well. Just to throw that in there. But you got to.
Yeah.
But now, of course, I lost my train of thought. But, the father talks a little bit about this and also the interest of others exploiting that. I thought it was a really interesting comment where he said that the Sith are but one of them. And so it's who else would want to do this? And you could see both sides of the fence why others would want this power. But so it's this power that no one else has, no one can wield. And it very much fits with that definition. But at the same time, it's this idea of if others were to either control their ability to use that power in some way, which seems a little unexpected or unreasonable, then some of your other definitions start getting in of where they're definitely ruling and lordships over other lords and things like that.
Yeah.
And more of a hierarchy start to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really, I kind of guess I was leaning towards that latter definition, but it would be cool if there was something more there that we didn't see, or, that title was given to them prior to them coming over there.
Well, you kind of see it with the son. He flirts with it, right? And we'll talk a little bit about it, but he starts to flirt with this about wanting power over others as he becomes more and more consumed. So we'll touch on that here in a few minutes, but I think we definitely see why that's appropriate.
Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about the daughter first, and then we'll kind of finish up with the son for this episode. But I want to just kind of talk about some of the physical characteristics, because and then I forget now where this episode fell in line, because I don't think I had seen. So I'm sorry. The Diatham, or the angels, right? That little orphan Anakin refers to in the Phantom Menace.
Right.
He mentions, "Are you an angel?" And then later on, we get I don't know. I won't call it retcon, but we get a kind of a retcon of, oh no, there is a race of beings that looks like these angelic beings. They're tall, that slender, that kind of thing. It's the same being that at one point I think they were talking Snoke may have been a part of. But she's got a very unique look. She's completely glowing in white. She's very beautiful person. She's very tall. And she is kind of representation of the Force. She is reflective of the Force. She's light in color, again, very angelic. She's got almost like a touch of grace about her even as she walks.
Yeah.
And all that's been purposely done, right? But later on, she also makes a comment later that she is she's the selfless one.
Selfless, right?
Selfless one, whereas her brother is the selfish one.
Right. That's their nature, right?
And that's just how they are. That's how they're wired. But that selfless nature, we get two very, very really good examples over in I think it's an Altar of Mortis that we get both of them. But the first one is when she sacrifices herself for her father. So there's a moment in this arc where the son is about to kind of, be through with his father, stab him. She jumps in front of her father and takes the dagger in the back of her, in her back. All right, that's the first act. And then just a few moments later, as she's kind of laying there, nearly about to die, Ahsoka's dead. Sorry if you didn't know that. But Ahsoka's laying there. She's dead. And her last request basically is, hey, she doesn't say all this. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but she basically looks at her father and says, hey, go ahead and transfer my life force, whatever life I've got left, back into this girl to save her life. And that's, again, so that would be her second act of selflessness. So definitely some really big moments there where she kind of not only says that's who she is. She also shows us. But what are some of the other, I guess, characteristics of her that stood out for you?
Yeah, when her and her brother are dueling, you see that she is rarely the aggressor as well, which we've heard the Jedi talk about. You always use the power for knowledge and defense. And we very much see that she is absorbing the red force lightning, and she's deflecting it. We've seen some other characters do that as well. But again, she's not usually on the offense, but she can be assertive. And what's interesting though is when she tells Anakin, and you were going to touch on this in a minute, but when she tells Anakin that it's forbidden for him to touch her, her voice changes. So usually her voice has got this, all the voices, including the father and the son, all have this kind of double recording type of thing to it. So they've got a weird mix to their voices, and hers generally is in the upper registers. But whenever he touches her and she reacts very negatively to that, you have this lower register all of a sudden kick in that has this more gravelly, almost a very dark tone to it. So it was just interesting to have that one brief moment where I don't think we have that moment anywhere else in any of the episodes, but it was just this one moment where she, she deterred from her light path, if you will, or selfless type of path. And so that was interesting. But yeah, it was a lot of just, defense, and the grace, I think, is what's really clear. And there were some oddities about her too that I don't know that I understood as we got through some of the episodes about what she could or could not do. But she was also very subservient to her father. She was the one, patient, kneeling, meditating with her father. I need to take you to my father. He'll know what's best to do. And so very much a subservient, the good child, if you will.
Yeah. And so I guess like her brother, and who we'll discuss here in just a minute, she had this ability to kind of turn into this like flying griffin, which is a cool concept. And I always, I wondered why would they put that in there, but maybe it was just simply to address the fact that how the heck do they get around this planet, right?
Yeah.
They have no other means of transportation. So, we'll just make it so that they can transfer. It's a cool, I'm not dogging it in any way. I think it's a really neat aspect of them that they do that.
Yeah. Griffins tend to be associated with light though, right? They tend to be associated with the good guy, and some of the other medieval, or not medieval, but fantasy type
fantasy.
In fantasy, usually the griffins are associated with the light, and so it was very appropriate that was her transformed or transmogrified form, whatever you want to call it, her other self.
I want to go back to something you mentioned just quickly, but there's that moment, like you said, where they're fighting, the brother and the daughter, and we'll talk about his abilities because they're very interesting. But hers in particular, she's sitting there and she's, like you said, she's defensive and that kind of thing. But did you feel like as Force gods that battle was maybe not as over the top as it should have been or could have been? Or do you think it was just really appropriate given that that wasn't the focus in that moment, right? That really wasn't the point. I guess where I was going is when they were about to fight, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to see something new here in terms of force powers, and we really don't. We just see kind of slight variations of what we've seen already with, some of the other force wielding characters of even the Jedi, the force push. We've got some force lightning coming from the brother, that kind of thing. But did you feel like that was a little overwhelming, or do you feel like they were holding back in any way?
So yeah, I mean, it was an underwhelming. They kind of knocked each other over, and they would transform back to their human selves, if you will. But I think that they were holding back to an extent. They're brother and sister, and they don't hate one another, and we see that very clearly later on. But they don't hate. So I view this as kind of the petty fighting, where you fight with a sibling, and you might get pretty physical with them, and you might do a little bit of damage, but you're not really out to kill them. You're not out to maim them or to terminally wound them or do something to them that's going to permanently damage them. And that's what I viewed in this, was that they were not necessarily, they weren't feeling themselves out or trading kid punches, because they were letting each other have it. But at the same time, they had no intention of following through with anything that was going to be permanent in nature that would wound them or really, put their relationship in a way that could not be repaired at some point. They eventually got to that path, but I don't think that was really the intent a lot of the time.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Until she learned the truth about what he tried to do to the father.
Yeah, and then she was like, let's just kill him.
Yep.
Yeah, so here's another. So I guess one other thing, too, that I had was just she seemed very apologetic for her brother's actions. And again, this is more of her passive, selfless nature probably coming out, manifesting. She seemed very much like that, the glass is half full, especially when it comes to her brother. I believe she told both Kenobi and the father that her brother wasn't to be blamed for his actions because that's just who he was. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but she does come across as this unapologetic in defending her brother's actions. And from a certain point of view, you could almost say that she represents hope in that way, right? She is the light. There's a sense of hope there that things are, that people, that you give people the benefit of the doubt and their intentions may not always be good at first, but true to their heart, they do have good intentions, that kind of thing. So,
but she was naive as well, though, and I think that's the other side of hope that you have to be careful with. Is that you can't have so much hope and faith in people that you will be let down. I mean, you will be let down. I mean, Beckett taught us some of these lessons already, right?
Yeah.
But you have to, you can't be naive and blind to what they are. And she wasn't. She understood it was his nature. But like you said, she kept apologizing for it. And I think maybe she just saw it as education of other people. And it was something that she was accustomed to. And so it's not really that surprising. But it seemed like she was also blind to it in some cases about how far he would go. And she didn't want to believe when Obi-Wan told her that, he attempted to kill her father.
Yeah.
That's too far. He would never do that, right? Yeah.
Right. No, he wouldn't do that.
Yeah. His red eyes, come on.
So, and then let's just talk quickly about her death, because there's, again, we mentioned earlier when she dies essentially by transferring her life force, or I guess some part of her life, or I don't know, her force power into Ahsoka so that Ahsoka may live. Which at some point, maybe in the next episode, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what that means as part of the legacy, because she does come back. But anyways, it's interesting because when she dies, her body it stays there, right? She doesn't turn into a force ghost. It doesn't dissipate. She's got a physical form still. And then we get even later on, when the son goes back to retrieve the dagger, he goes back to her grave, opens it up, and she's still there in a physical form. I only mention this because there's one significant difference, at least with the father, in that, his body dissipates, and we can talk about that later in the next episode about what does that mean for him. But it is interesting that somebody like her, as powerful as she is, as, in tune with the Force, whatever you want to say, that she wouldn't transfer, her life force wouldn't transfer somewhere else in some way. Maybe not like a Force ghost, like the Jedi or the light side. But if anybody was going to transfer out apart from her father, it seems like she would have been the one. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I'm a little surprised it wouldn't be the father as well. But we'll talk a little bit about why that's probably not the case eventually. Yeah. But yeah, it does. It's interesting though that she still doesn't disappear though, because, and I think this is probably my guess is the father withholding information because of the son. In the light side users, it seems like this would be something important to share, especially given their abilities. I mean, these are Force users like on anything we've seen. So it seemed odd to me that it wouldn't be possible. I also don't know if the dagger had some sort of special components to it. We know that it had magical properties. That was the intent of David Filoni, was that it had magical properties. It was different. It had a different reaction to these characters when it struck them. So it's possible that something else happened there. That doesn't seem likely. I just had to disprove that in my head with the father. So sorry about that. Sorry, I had to get myself there.
Yeah, no. That's good.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I have to go in circles sometimes. But yeah, I think it's this action, though, of giving her life force to someone else. You have already transferred that. So your physical body is going to stay there. Your life force has gone somewhere else. She hasn't really transferred into. I'm curious if she's really transferred into the cosmic force at that point, and what happens. I have more questions than answers, or even really speculation on it.
Well, and I think again, sorry, I know I'm teasing out that second episode here, but when we get to the Convor and what we see in Rebel, that may have some significance here in terms of why she doesn't dissipate like that. But anyways, all right, so let's move on to the son. So we'll kind of wrap up with the son, but let's talk firstly about some of his physical characteristics and appearance. I mean, this guy looks like a Sith, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he very much looks like the prototype for like the Inquisitors that we see in Rebels or even in the Vader comics. And as we mentioned with the daughter, the son, he's, purely selfish. He's consumed by the power of the dark side and doing whatever he can or whatever he needs to in order to get off Mortis so that his dark side powers can continue and grow in some way. Going to looking at his, his powers and physical abilities. You mentioned earlier, that was a very cool moment when he was able to extinguish those lightsabers. And then later on, I want to say when he's fighting, I forget who he's fighting, if it's Anakin or Obi-Wan. It's probably Anakin, but he's sitting there just using his arms.
Yeah.
Right. Just simply blocking these lightsabers, which is a cool power in itself. Going back to that battle again between him and his sister, it was cool to see Force lightning, but it was red.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, it seems like kind of petty. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but it was a very unique concept and it got me thinking. It's like, okay, well, with Palpatine,
yeah, what's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. Why wasn't his Force lightning not red? And it could just be an artistic take on it, and I don't know. They wanted to show something different, but it looked like Force lightning. It sounded like Force lightning, with the exception of the color, I guess. But anyways, it was a neat little thing they did there with that one.
I think it's this idea of you're dealing with beings that are beyond our comprehension, so they should be able to do things that are different than what we've seen, even though they have similarities in what we'll call the real world of what we're used to seeing.
Yeah. And maybe they can change it whatever color they want, much like my Switcher mouse. So here's something else too. So we also see the son has this ability to kind of creep into your dreams, a la Freddy Krueger.
Yeah,
and he's basically able to kind of come in, and not only that, but he can take a form even outside of dreams, which we see a little bit later as well. But at one point he takes on the form of Shmi Skywalker and confronts Anakin. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. He takes on that little baby gargoyle or baby demon thing with Ahsoka.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, it was very different. And this is the first time I think we've ever seen anything like that. But just, I want to focus on the aspect of the dreams, or at least just highlight that, because that is very intriguing that they're able to kind of go into that realm. We see Anakin sleeping there. We see him having nightmares. We know that, a lot of times in dreams is where they get their Force visions, right? So there's definitely some kind of a parallel, some way, some tie in the Star Wars universe between, our dreams or dreams in general and the Force and some of that. So it's kind of cool how he's able to kind of navigate into that realm, if you will.
Do you think that was the son? Do you think that was the son who appeared to Ahsoka? Like her older self? Was that the son or the daughter?
Yeah, that one, I don't know, because that one, it seemed like it was more like the daughter, or I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know if it was a son, because that was almost self-reflecting of, well, okay, I'm going back and forth here. I'm going to say it's a son, only because I think the point of that was really to try to get Ahsoka to get out of the picture, right? You're never going to be anything unless you get rid of your master, kind of thing. I think it was just more of the son playing into Anakin's, or all the other characters and pieces here, into their fears, and really driving away everybody and anything from Anakin himself, so that he could take Anakin for his selfish reasons, right?
Yep.
So I think that was his manifestation. I think he was in there. He was trying to drive her out, just like he was trying to drive out Padme, trying to drive out Anakin to leave the Jedi Order, do all this stuff, and just be with him so that they could go on and rule together. Final answer. Yeah,
no, that's how I interpreted it as well. I originally thought it would have been the daughter, but yeah, everything you just said, I think, is spot on. He was trying to drive that wedge, isolate, because that's what the Sith do in general, or the dark side does in general: isolate and then control, move in for the kill. Yeah. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Here's another, going back to, I guess, his abilities. Did you ever get the sense from this episode that the son's abilities were growing because of what was occurring in the Clone Wars?
Absolutely.
Like the war itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. He was feeding on it. They talked about it in the episode that the aggression, especially once they had turned Ahsoka temporarily, when he had turned Ahsoka and she was fighting Obi-Wan and Anakin, he was feeding on all that aggression and the anger and the frustration and all these things that were going on. And he was getting in. They could feel it. They could feel his powers growing. And I think that was probably the galaxy at large. But I imagine the father was able to subdue some of that. And these are some of the questions that we'll dig into is how does the general conflict impact what's going on there? And then vice versa, how is what's going on there impact the general conflict around them that they're withdrawn from? Because they had some dialogue in there that, again, I don't know if it quite lines up about, the war was taking over and now it was going to be the dominant, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I definitely got the feeling he was getting stronger. I felt like the daughter was not, like, she was very stagnant in her abilities, and she didn't get a lot of room to shine. I think light side users typically don't, but he was clearly on this trajectory that was moving into the more powerful.
All right. So I threw this out here. It says Sith, laugh, yes, and no. So, okay. You and I had a quick conversation about this earlier in the week, but I have a quick riddle for you. I am not Sith. I am Sith. What am I?
You are Mortis.
Yeah, thank you. I'm the son, right?
Yeah.
There's only one answer, I guess. But
yeah.
So anyways, I'm kind of joking around here. But I guess, what did he mean by that? Is it really just, do you think it's as simple as the meaning as he was a force wielder who had aligned with the dark side but didn't follow the Sith code and the dogma that's, associated with the Sith? Or is this just kind of like the inverse of Ahsoka in Rebels, where she claims not to be a Jedi and yet she clearly follows the light? We can talk about other examples too if you want, like Luke and Rey and that sort of thing. But
right.
What was your take on this? How did you interpret that?
Yeah, my answer is yes.
Great.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, though, is that these are labels. Sith and Jedi are interpretations of what the Force is and how to interpret the light and the dark. And he laughs because it's way too simplified for
right.
him. It's way beyond the simple Sith mottos of what their goals are to achieve, even though he tends to align with some of that with the dominance and power. But he doesn't have the constraints, or he's not going to associate himself in one way or with it. And we saw this with the father's conversation with Anakin as well. We are beyond these terms of Jedi and Sith. They're above and beyond. They don't have a lot of meaning to them. And I think that's one of the interesting parts is what is that then? Like, is it just pure? What does pure dark side actually look like without the context of the Sith to frame it up? And I think that's an interesting one to explore as well. But so I think that's exactly what he was saying. He's not Sith, but he gets why their simple minds want to equate it to that.
Yeah, and not to harp on the Luke Skywalker quote, but it's so much more. I think that's essentially what he's saying here too. Is at some point you achieve a level of understanding of the Force that transcends just the simple titles of Jedi and Sith, or good versus evil. It's all about a point of view. It's all about the bigger picture and that kind of thing.
Well, and even Yoda and Luke's conversation in Last Jedi has some similarities too about, the old ways of the Jedi. It's time for those to end. And so what does that become? What does that look to become? I mean, we could argue that Rey having the books is probably going to, negate some of that, but generally speaking, the premise is still there.
Let's go back to his when he, I guess, manifests as Shmi Skywalker. I want to talk about his motivation and intent. Why he was doing that. What was his intent? What was the purpose of that? Because in Overlords, when he does manifest as that, I think we get quite a bit about Anakin. But keeping it about the son for now. What was his intent in presenting himself as his mother, and why did he want Anakin to leave Padme? And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but that's the question that I'm kind of throwing out.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one, because at that point, it's almost like the son is supporting the father's directive. Like,
right. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. We need you. I need you.
Yeah. And to maintain this idea of balance. And, so it was a little confusing, granted, where he wanted to end up as the episodes went on. And so what was less clear to me is if the son was really just feeling it out or supportive of what, didn't really know what was going on with his father, or that had an idea that he probably knew he was dying in some capacity. But it was weird that letting go of the guilt, I mean, those were the things that were going to drive him further along, unless it was just in the Sith way, it's also a matter of accepting who you are. And this matter of choice and losing that side of you altogether. But to me, those are the things that are going to bring you down. But I think even in the dark side, those are limitations to what you're able to accomplish if you continue to hold yourself back to that. Those are the things that can also bring you back to the light.
Yeah, there's, he goes so far in that moment, right in that scene after he is basically talking about Padme, he goes so far to say that his love for Padme and the fear that he had in losing him, it was poison. He mentions it also, it's a prison. That's not love. That's prison, that you're having to live like this. He's completely being brutally honest, and he's not lying. It really was. And we saw that Anakin was suffering because he was in this world of, loving someone he wasn't supposed to, knowing that she was going to die, and then really struggling with, how do I prevent that from happening? How do I change my fate and change the destiny of what was going to occur? Excuse me. Speaking of destiny, in that next line, the very next line, he says, he goes on to say, tell Anakin that Padme is not his destiny, which seems like at this point, he's really just trying to turn Anakin against the thought of ever going back to her so that he can join, up with the sun again and kind of rule that galaxy together.
Right.
But
and again, don't care about anything except what you want, right? So lesson learned. Okay, if you drop everything, you can't care about it. It can't hurt you either. And just shape the world in your image.
There's also something that he says here, again, as Shmi Skywalker, that is, it seemed like a throwaway line for a while. And to me, it just has a lot more significance, more so now than ever. But there's a moment here where he says, it's time that you realize your guilt does not define you. You define your guilt. And this ties directly into the title card of this episode, which is balance is found in the one who faces his guilt. I kind of want to touch on this in the next episode, but that whole line of balance is found in the one who faces his guilt, that really speaks to the overall story of Anakin Skywalker. It speaks to Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, right? He doesn't really come back around until he faces the guilt of having, turned his back on the Jedi, decided to step away from everything. It could be more, who knows, in episode 9, this could be a statement that resonates with Kylo Ren, right? He's dealing with a lot of guilt in his life. And if he is going to be redeemed, and if there is a balance or a way for him to find balance in all of that to kind of, stop all that, the struggle that he has within him, this could be it right here. That balance is found in the one who faces his guilt. But I just thought it was profound that there's somebody like this character of the son, who is evil, who embodies the dark side and that kind of thing, is able to kind of really give him some wholesome message here that really he needs to hear, and ultimately is what's going to save him, and is ultimately what's going to bring about balance in the Force.
Yeah, and it continues to show you that the same advice you hear or you give or you receive can be taken in different ways, and it can lead you down a totally different path, right? So letting go of your guilt, even when Anakin was tested, he has to make choices. And do you choose one or do you choose the other, or is there a way to choose both? And I think this is one of my favorite title cards, by the way. That this is just one of the more profound ones that are really direct and speaks directly to a character and in a moment that is so far reaching. So that's always been one of my favorites. So I'm glad you brought that up. But it's just one of these things. Yeah, he's got to make choices, and the son is giving him this advice, which is more or less what the daughter would probably give him as well. But there's still different ways that you can take it, and it can still lead you down these paths, because clearly he wants him to, let go of this guilt and think more selfishly. But you can also let go of the guilt and serve in the light. So it still just depends on how you're going to go about doing it. And again, it's this pressure and this malevolence behind it on the son's side that continues to push his own agenda.
Later on, there's a moment in there where the father and the son are kind of speaking, and the father makes a comment to him about how he's becoming something that he should not.
Right. And
it got me thinking, because I didn't understand I think I've got a better understanding now, but at least initially, I didn't know if what the father was trying to say is that this was not your destiny to even go to the dark side. He was already aligned with the dark side, right? That was the whole point. We know that, and we know that the father was trying to keep them in balance and to ensure that they didn't get out and wreak havoc one way or the other, or disrupt the balance of the force, that kind of thing. But the comment that he made about how he was becoming something he should not, did you take that as something that like he was becoming too far to the dark side, falling too far to the dark side, or being too consumed by the dark side? Or was his destiny something completely different than this to begin with?
So I felt bad for the son right here, actually, because his sister was so pure and so good. How is she not too far to the light? To where it makes sense that he would have to become darker, because quite honestly, it didn't seem like she did any wrong until she made some choices later on, which I would argue was probably pulling away from the light in some regards. But this is the part that's always frustrating with some of the Star Wars ideas on balance and light and dark is, we see the characters get darker, but it's really difficult to show characters get pure or more light, right? That path, if you're already light, it's hard to get brighter, I guess.
Yeah.
But I kind of, I know for storytelling purposes, I get it, but right. So I always feel kind of bad for the characters because they get, poo-pooed on some of these things. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to really get the balance going. Really, Dad, I'm really trying to help you out here. So cut me some slack. Yeah. But I don't know. This is one of these things of, I think he wanted his children, the father's children, to be closer to the middle, even though their natures were to skew one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And again, the further out he goes, he is creating this imbalance in the family. And he was just talking, a family imbalance is a galaxy and a universe imbalance. And that was one of the premises of the episodes, was that him being able to control his family in this special world was the embodiment of what the galaxy was supposed to be doing as well, or how it would behave. And it was directly correlated to it. Yeah. And anytime he started straying out, and we could equate that to what was going on in the Clone Wars. So the further he strayed out, to your point earlier, the further the Clone Wars and the Jedi starting to twinge a little more to the dark side. Sidious gets a little bit stronger. Things start unraveling a bit.
And even then, so with all that said, right, we know he was really starting to kind of veer off into the dark side, and that had already consumed him. And yet, there's a moment in there, right after he kills his sister, that he has grief. Like he's in agony, he's in pain, he's at the loss of his sister that he's done this. And so you got to think that there's still good in him, right? I mean, there's still some glimmer of light or hope in there. And this is not the only instance. This is one of two instances, because later on, whenever his father sacrifices himself with the dagger and kills himself, he again has this grieving moment where he's telling his father it didn't have to be this way. And I think it just speaks to that whole concept that, no one's ever really gone, or going back earlier in the quote of this arc, nothing ever, we didn't talk about this, but Shmi Scott, when the son is, as Shmi Skywalker, he tells Anakin Skywalker that nothing ever really dies, my son. And I think it really just kind of goes back to both of those. But it's just an interesting aspect. It's a very, you think you got him nailed down. You think you understand where he is. He's just another dark side user. And yet those are two very shocking moments, and for two different reasons, I guess, given what's happened leading up into that, that, you get a sense that he could have been redeemable. There's still light in him. There's still good in him.
Right. And it was the moment that we thought we would see or read or hear about with Kylo and Han Solo of what that moment was, and whether or not he would have some moment of regret or some moment of deeper thought. One of the things I think that was interesting about the son with these two scenarios, though, with both his sister and then with his father, with his sister, he didn't take the time. Well, let me back up. He didn't get absorbed by his guilt or regret over what happened. He moved on quickly. Now with his father, that lasted a bit longer, which of course led to some betrayal and Anakin finally doing what had to be done. Yeah. And so I think it's one of these things of learning his own lesson would have been very appropriate here. If he would not have dwelled on his guilt, dwelled on that situation, that grief, the very things he was preaching against led to him, led to his own demise.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, I would agree. Should have listened to his own words there. And then, so we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this one because it's pretty obvious what they're doing here. But there is one moment where we get the son kind of giving Anakin a lot to think about and basically shows him his future. We get the visions of, they're down in the middle of, I don't know, it looks like Mustafar or something, but
right.
It's basically like this lava area. Anyways,
the well of the, what was it? The well of the dark side.
Well of the dark side. Yeah. So they're in the well of the dark side. And it's there that the son shows him exactly what's going to happen. Everything from, Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting. We hear the line of, you were my brother. We get I think it's Padme's death. We get, him turning into Vader at the very end. We see the silhouette of Vader's helmet. And so he immediately in this moment, Anakin knows exactly what's going to happen. And that is the only reason at that point that he gives up everything. He gives up the idea of Padme. He gives up the idea of the Jedi Order. He accepts that he is the chosen one, that he has to bring balance to the Force. And he almost accepts this as this is the way to bring balance by simply joining with the son and ensuring that the Emperor never happens and he never becomes that evil. And it's short-sighted, right? Because he's essentially just doing the same thing in a different way.
Right.
But that moment was one of the cooler moments, I think, in the Clone Wars, because it was a way that they pulled in direct lines, direct quotes from the movies, much like we saw in the World Between Worlds episode, where we got some of those quotes and stuff. It just, the echoes there were very interesting and really appealing. And I remember when that happened. I definitely remember when I was watching the show in the moment thinking, okay, how the heck are they going to dig themselves out of this?
Exactly.
Because by all intents and purposes, Anakin has no idea that this is about to happen. And of course they bail themselves out by the father going in and, touching his forehead and erasing basically everything and saying that his son had tampered with the laws of time.
Right.
Which I thought was an interesting thing because I don't think we've ever touched on that since then. But there are laws of time that exist within Star Wars as well. Anyways, just thoughts on that episode or that particular scene.
It was really powerful, first of all, but it was it's these contradictions of what Anakin has to do and what he thinks is necessary to avoid the atrocities that he's going to, he's again, this is the way I view Anakin a lot of times in Vader, is that it's a lot of this self-preservation type of thing. He's just trying to avoid the things that he is going to do, not necessarily continuing to view the galaxy at large and to and listening to the Force of what the Force is telling him, or is hopefully speaking to him, and he's just not able to hear it about what that path should be. I mean, clearly they talk in these episodes a lot about the will of the Force and destiny still, but they talk a lot about controlling your future. The future does have a certain amount by its very nature, the ability to change, which is why this was so law-breaking by showing him the future. I'm assuming what we know is going to be the actual future. But it's just this idea that you can still influence the future, but we still got the will of the Force at play here. So that part confused me as to how, why do we still believe that the future can be changed? Or is it this general stream concept? We have the stream, which is the Force, and then you have, the rocks and the sticks and the things along the way that can, change your path throughout it. But generally you're still going in the same direction, and you can seriously screw it up and jump off at some point and end it. But the stream is still flowing one way.
Yeah, there's, I want to segue into our final piece really about the son's death and ultimately his fate. But the foresight that the son had, the ability to see into the future, seemed almost like on another level. I mean, you could argue that
is that a dark side ability?
Yeah, I think so.
It sure seems like it, right?
It's like, yeah, they seem very in tune with this. But it almost seems like it was amped up, and it could just be that the son is a Force wielder. He's a Force god. He's an overlord of the Force, whatever. So he's probably not on the same level, but I mean, you can make an argument too that it's the well of the dark side that's at play here. But we've never seen the power of someone to be able to show the future or predict the future in that way as we did in this episode, because it was very specific. It wasn't generalizations. It wasn't, things are going to go bad. This is like, no, he heard things that we know would come to be true. We saw things that we knew would come to be true. But you got to wonder then, because there's a moment in there where Mortis makes a comment that his destiny was not to stay on the planet, right? It was not, his destiny was elsewhere. He believed that being on Mortis was not his destiny. So any thoughts on what his destiny was and what he foresaw? Because again, if you go along the lines of that he was that powerful and he was able to see it, he had to have a pretty clear picture of what things look like. He just needed to get off the planet. But once he did, he knew exactly what that was going to be. Any thoughts on what that was? Is it really as simple as, oh, he's just ruling the galaxy, or do you think there was more?
I think it's ruling the galaxy. I think it's just sheer power. And again, removing it's kind of the Sith model, breaking the chains and having this ultimate freedom. Because like you said, he's just been kept down for his entire life. He's always had his father's hand, keeping him down, restricting what he's able to do. It's like an amplified Anakin of sorts. And I think it's very much of, show the galaxy, show the universe, I guess, really what he is capable of. And all these others are just pretenders. This emperor, he's just a pretender. And none of these people really understand what the dark side is fully capable of doing. And we had a little flavor of this with Momin too, where, he has a different insight into all of this than others. And I think the son is along those lines. I mean, very different. Clearly he's not an artist, but he still has this, that we know of. Yeah. That we know of, right? We don't know what his pastimes were, but, it's still, I think it's very much still just dominance and control and power. I mean, he doesn't exemplify any other behaviors that seem inconsistent with that with that direction, unless you're seeing something I'm not.
No. It really was a genuine question on what it could have possibly been, and I think I'm with you. Honestly, I really think it's just as simple as the obsession of power, and kind of being punch drunk by the thought of having more of it. I think he'd already started down that path, and he was going to go to no end to kind of get there. So, well, let's wrap this up with his death, because ultimately, again, we mentioned that his father is the one who sacrifices himself. And it's an interesting concept because this is, up until now, we got no notion that this was the case, but it's almost like the father was powering him, for lack of a better term. He even says that now that he's, the father says that now he was dying, that he was powerless, or he had been depowered in some way. And that was enough that he could give the wink and the nudge over to Anakin to take the lightsaber and stab the son in the back while the son was grieving almost, right? He seemed truly remorseful that his father had died and was kind of sitting there holding him in his last dying breath. And what does the father do? Gives him that little wink. Anakin comes over, stabs him in the back of with the lightsaber, and that's kind of the end of him. That's how he ends up dying. So, which I thought was an interesting concept, because it's interesting in that the father, even though the entire time in this episode he is worried that things are becoming unbalanced and that his son is becoming too powerful and or he is becoming less powerful, he being the father, he had this like ripcord thing that he could always do at any time, where all he had to do was just kill himself. And I guess that would kill his son, or at least depower him or remove his power in some way. But it's just an interesting concept that they're all tied together, from a relationship perspective, but then certainly from a force power perspective as well, as we saw here in his final moments.
Yeah, and I had to do a little research to figure out what this part was trying to say and what actually happened. And I found some theories out there. So I'll toss a couple of these out here, of that the blade that that the father stabbed himself with really was just taking the immortality away. So there was one idea that this was taking the mortality away, or immortality away. I apologize.
Right.
And then so Anakin actually killed both the son and the father at the same time, that he ran the blade all the way through both. And I think that's what actually killed both of them. But I was trying to go frame by frame, and I ran out of time to see if that was actually the case.
Yeah,
and I don't know that you can see it. Yeah.
The only thing I'd say is, and I may be completely on crack here, but I could have sworn in one of those scenes, when you look, it's showing Anakin and you see the back of the father, I want to say you can see a hole in his back, like just in his like above his back shoulder blade.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe that's not the case. And I guess I always assumed that was the case.
I thought it was the blade,
Anakin
the other blade, not Anakin's.
No, because he takes the blade. It's almost kind of like a front stabbing in the stomach kind of thing, or in the heart thing.
Okay.
This seemed like it was further up and to the left. And I guess when I had seen this, or at least my recollection of it, is that Anakin, as he was stabbing the son, did stab the father too, whether he meant to or not. I don't think he intentionally meant to, but I think that he was already dying anyway. So, let me put you out of your misery kind of thing. But I assumed that was the case. They had stabbed both of them at that point.
Right. But you're right. If he was dying and just his death alone would have weakened the son, I'm confused why he just didn't die. So, I mean, there was still a certain level of balance. We're not going to go all the way into balance, but there was still a certain level of balance between the daughter and the son.
Yeah.
And of course, by this point, a lot of things had happened. Options were becoming more limited, but he was so afraid of dying and having someone replace him, or having Anakin specifically replace him, that it seems like, maybe the risk was that he was dampening their powers so they couldn't make these calls. I mean, the whole thing started because they unleashed a 2,000-year-old distress call, a Jedi distress call. That's how they attracted the Republic in the first place. And so presumably they could have done this on their own and be able to get out of this predicament if the father wasn't there. So maybe that's the general idea behind it. I'm a little slow, but
no, yeah, I get where you're going with it. I don't know. It's a good question. I guess the last thing is, and I keep saying that, but really this is the last thing. Just a quick note: his body does stay in physical form. He does not dissipate. And I keep harping on that because we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the father in the next episode and what maybe some of this means. So that's going to do it for the son, and that's honestly going to do it for this episode. We'll come back next week and we'll pick this up with part 2 of the Echoes of Mortis. We'll talk about the father. We're going to get into a lot more with him because there's a lot more there. We'll get into Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One prophecy, talk about the balance of the Force. We'll revisit Qui-Gon Jinn because we've kind of barely touched on him, but there's just some interesting things that we want to touch on there. And then the legacy of Mortis, and really just kind of try to wrap this up and tie it back to, what Mortis has meant for other, shows and some of the other themes that we've seen in Rebels and Last Jedi, Force Awakens, that kind of thing. So, but before we go, what do we got going on with Ear Glue Media?
Well, we got a lot of great shows over there. So we've got The Basement, which of course we plugged last week, where we talked about George Lucas. Yeah. We've got Bad Gamers Anonymous that's producing awesome content. They've got some new hosts going over there with Crowley, with Jason and Joe. And then we've got, what else we got going on over there? Masters of the Universe. Yeah. Many Faces with Mike. And
yeah, I just wrapped up the Faker episode. So if you're looking forward to hearing me just rant and rave about how awesome Faker is, please join and listen to that episode.
Yeah. So lots of good stuff. A lot of new things coming down the pipe at some point. And invite everyone to go over there and check out the website and give us a listen.
Yep. And we'll have all of the links to social media and Patreon and all of that down in the show notes. So please support the show if you like what you're hearing. Please do that, and feel free to drop us any questions, comments, anything like that in email, and certainly throw in some positive ratings. Hopefully, please, if you could, in iTunes, wherever fine podcasts are sold. So that's going to do it for this show. Again, we'll be back with Echoes of Mortis Part 2 next week. So until then, we will see you.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.